Beneath the unforgiving sun of the Nubian desert, the sand shifts as if concealing secrets too ancient to name. Wind moves over half-buried stones, where fragments of broken pottery and the outlines of forgotten tombs whisper of a kingdom that once rivaled Egypt itself. Yet one object has remained conspicuously absent: the crown of Kush, the golden regalia that would have embodied sovereignty over one of Africa's most enduring civilizations. In Egyptian murals, pharaohs are shown draped in splendor, their crowns preserved in detail across temples and tombs. But for the Kushite kings, whose empire stretched for centuries along the Nile, the ultimate emblem of power has vanished. No crown has ever been recovered, no clear depiction remains unchallenged. A paradox stands in the sand. How can an empire of wealth and mastery over gold itself leave no trace of its most important treasure? Some suggest the Egyptians themselves seized it. After all, they coveted Nubian gold for centuries, raiding mines and annexing territories. To steal the crown would be to symbolically strip Kush of its legitimacy, ensuring that future generations saw Egypt as the sole heir to divine kingship. Others claim it was buried deliberately, hidden from invaders and successors alike, locked in a tomb still lost beneath the desert's shifting layers. Fringe researchers insist that the crown was no ordinary ornament, but an object carrying profound ceremonial power, one that, if unearthed, might challenge the accepted narrative of who ruled the Nile. Scholars remain divided. Was its absence an accident of history, the product of looting, or an intentional erasure of a rival dynasty's authority? Debate sharpens when examining the archaeological silence. Some maintain that the crown never existed as a physical object, but was instead a symbolic construct woven into ritual. Others argue that Egyptian chroniclers, eager to diminish their southern neighbors, deliberately excluded Kushite regalia from their records. A few go further, whispering that the crown may still rest beneath the sands of Meroe or Napata, guarded by the very burial traditions that kept Kushite pyramids preserved for millennia. Yet, the enigma endures. An empire drenched in gold left no trace of the one artifact that should have defined it. Did Egypt erase more than monuments? Did it steal memory itself? If the crown of Kush lies hidden, what truths about power, conquest, and silence would it expose? And if it has been lost forever, how much of history has been deliberately written to keep us blind? In the shadow of towering granite statues along the Nile, time bends backward to the 8th century BCE. The temples at Karnak still echo with inscriptions carved during the reign of kings whose skin and homeland marked them as outsiders to Egypt, yet who once sat upon its throne. These rulers, now known as the Black Pharaohs of Dynasty 25, were Kushites, sovereigns from the south who crossed deserts and rivers to claim Egypt itself. Their monuments remain visible, their legacy carved into sandstone and granite, yet their story is truncated, tucked into the margins of history. How can a dynasty that once ruled both Upper and Lower Egypt, unifying the land at a time of fracture, be remembered as little more than a footnote compared to the pharaohs who came after? Some believe Egypt's later dynasties deliberately obscured their memory, rewriting annals to minimize Kushite dominance. Others suggest that European scholars of the colonial era, uncomfortable with the notion of an African empire ruling Egypt, downplayed Dynasty 25's importance in modern retellings. Fringe theorists propose something more provocative, that the Kushite kings inherited knowledge Egypt itself had forgotten, reviving architectural and ritual practices that had long lain dormant. Historians dispute these claims, but the evidence remains unsettling. During their reign, vast temples were restored, religious traditions revived, and political order reimposed. If their accomplishments were so significant, why are they so often omitted from mainstream accounts? The debate is fierce. Some argue the Kushites were no more than temporary occupiers, opportunists exploiting Egypt's weakness. Others claim they were restorers, bringing cultural renewal to a land in decline. Still others whisper that their reign ended not because they were defeated outright, but because their memory threatened to destabilize the carefully curated image of Egyptian continuity. Yet, the mystery endures. If Dynasty 25 was truly erased, who orchestrated its silence? Was it Egypt's successors, anxious to bury a rival lineage, or modern historians, unwilling to acknowledge Africa's forgotten empire? And if their monuments still stand against the desert winds, what else lies waiting to be reread, re-seen, re-remembered? Could the Black Pharaohs be the missing link between Egypt's rise and its ultimate decline? Or were they guardians of a knowledge too disruptive to survive unaltered? High on the banks of the Nile, in the Nubian heartland, the ruins of Napata lie half-consumed by sand. The outlines of once great temples rise like blackened teeth, their stones scorched and fractured as if fire itself had been called down upon them. Here, at the base of Jebel Barkal, Kushite kings once performed the rituals of power, affirming their rule over lands stretching from the deserts of Sudan to the floodplains of Egypt. Yet the remains tell a darker story: charred walls, shattered statues, and fragments of once sacred halls. The paradox deepens. How could temples of such importance, dedicated to the seat of Kushite power, be reduced to ash? Was this the hand of invaders, or the mark of some deeper calamity that history refuses to explain? Some claim Egypt was responsible, its armies marching south to destroy the sanctuaries of a rival kingdom, ensuring that Kush would never again threaten the Nile. Others argue that internal strife consumed Napata, with factions within Kush itself burning their own holy places during civil conflict. Fringe researchers insist something stranger may have occurred, that catastrophic natural fire, sparked by drought or lightning, was later woven into legend as conquest. Scholars remain divided, pointing to evidence of both military campaigns and environmental stress. Yet the archaeological scars resist simple explanation. The debate stretches across time. Some maintain the temples were deliberately targeted, wiped out as part of Egypt's propaganda war to erase Kush's identity. Others suggest their destruction was ritualistic, a symbolic act of closure marking the end of an age. Still others whisper that priests themselves concealed relics in flame, ensuring that treasures would never fall into foreign hands. And yet, the enigma persists. If Napata was deliberately burned, what was being hidden or destroyed so completely? Were these temples incinerated to erase a legacy of defiance? Could their ashes still conceal artifacts too dangerous to reveal? Or do the ruins stand as a silent witness to a forgotten war, its victors still shaping our history even now? Across the ochre sands of northern Sudan, hundreds of sharp silhouettes pierce the horizon, pyramids rising like daggers against the sky. At first glance, they seem to echo Egypt's iconic monuments, yet their form is startlingly different. The Kushite pyramids are smaller, their angles steeper, their entrances narrower, their presence clustered in numbers that far exceed the famous tombs at Giza. Here lies the paradox. Why would a supposedly lesser civilization build more pyramids than Egypt itself? And why would they adopt a design so alien to the one they are accused of merely copying? Some suggest the Kushites were imitators, borrowing a tradition from the north but reshaping it without mastery. Others claim the form was intentional, crafted to align with solar and celestial patterns distinct from Egyptian practice. Fringe theorists propose something more provocative, that these structures were never copies at all, but survivals of a much older architectural code, perhaps even the prototype upon which Egypt's monumental tradition was built. The debate fractures scholars. Some argue the scale shows weakness, that Kush lacked the resources for grand monuments. Others maintain the steep angles had symbolic weight, pointing directly to the sky, anchoring kings to eternity through precision geometry. Archaeologists puzzle over why so many pyramids were built here, clustered in necropolises of dozens, while Egypt's rulers chose far fewer. Was it a cultural obsession, or a legacy Egypt sought to erase by labeling them mere imitations? Still, the questions linger. Were the Kushite pyramids echoes of Egyptian grandeur, or the true origin of the pyramid tradition itself? Why does archaeology dismiss them as derivative when their form is unique? And what knowledge remains sealed in those steep chambers, hidden beneath centuries of shifting sand? On the windswept plains of Meroitic, stone reliefs show women with crowns, spears, and the commanding stance of sovereigns. They were the Candaces, the warrior queens of Kush, who not only ruled their own people but faced down Rome itself. One queen, Amanirenas, led armies against Augustus and forced Rome to negotiate peace on her terms. The paradox is striking. While Egyptian queens are immortalized in art and myth, these Kushite rulers, whose power was equal if not greater, vanish from mainstream history. Why do records of women who defied empires fade into silence while others are endlessly celebrated? Some believe their memory was deliberately minimized by Rome, which could not accept the humiliation of losing to warrior queens from the south. Others argue Egypt's dominance in historical storytelling drowned out the voices of neighboring dynasties. Fringe researchers whisper that the Candaces controlled more than armies. They commanded spiritual authority, holding rituals and secrets that threatened male-dominated traditions to the north. Scholars remain divided. Were they anomalies, temporary rulers in times of crisis, or part of an unbroken lineage where women wielded sustained power? Historians dispute whether Rome's records deliberately understate their victories, or whether fragments of their achievements remain hidden beneath Meroa's ruins. And yet the enigma endures. Why would some of the most powerful women of antiquity be reduced to shadows in the narrative of empire? Still, the questions linger. How many stories of female leadership have been erased? What treasures of their reign remain buried? And why does history resist remembering queens who bent empires to their will? Beneath the cracked earth of the Nubian desert, shafts plunge deep into stone where ancient miners once carved tunnels by fire and hand. This was Kush, a land built upon veins of gold so rich that Egypt called it the land of Nub, a name synonymous with treasure. For centuries, caravans carried this wealth north, fueling Egypt's temples, crowns, and armies. Yet here lies the paradox. If Kush possessed the richest gold fields of the Nile, why do we know so little of its own technologies, its networks of extraction, its methods of refinement? Egypt's mines are well studied, yet Kush's, though older and perhaps more extensive, remain barely explored. Some suggest Egypt deliberately obscured the sources of its southern wealth, claiming it as its own. Others argue that Kushite methods were lost because they were never recorded, passed instead through oral traditions that perished with time. Fringe theorists insist something darker, that Kush's technologies were suppressed, their knowledge hidden, because it revealed levels of engineering sophistication that challenged the narrative of Egyptian superiority. Scholars still debate whether Kush introduced fire-setting techniques, controlled desert aquifers for miners, or even pioneered tools that Egypt later claimed. Historians dispute whether these mines were the true source of Egypt's dynastic splendor, their products rebranded as Egyptian achievements. And yet the mystery remains. How could a land that provided endless gold leave behind so little evidence of its own mastery? Still, the questions linger. Were Kush's mining secrets deliberately erased? What innovations lie undiscovered beneath collapsed shafts? And how much of Egypt's glory was truly borrowed from its southern neighbor? In the necropolises of Kush, sand drifts between weathered pyramids and crumbling burial chambers, yet the silence feels heavy, as if something is missing. Royal tombs, once sealed with treasures, have been found looted, their inscriptions fragmented, their artifacts scattered to museums or lost to time. The paradox stares from the absence. How could a kingdom so careful in honoring its dead leave so many burials undocumented, so many rulers unnamed? Some believe tomb robbers, ancient and modern alike, erased the evidence in search of gold. Others suggest priests themselves concealed treasures before Egyptian invasions, hiding regalia and scrolls that might prove Kush's sovereignty. Fringe researchers whisper of deliberate erasure, systematic removal of Kushite memory so Egypt could claim supremacy uncontested. The debate sharpens around specific finds. Some archaeologists argue looting alone explains the gaps. Others maintain the precision of the erasures. Names scratched away, cartouches destroyed, suggests more than theft. Historians dispute whether this was Egypt's propaganda machine, grinding Kush into silence, or whether Kush's own elites buried their history in secrecy, fearing desecration. Yet the enigma endures. Why are so many Kushite rulers shadows, their tombs erased as if they never lived? Still, the questions linger. Were the vanished burials lost to greed or hidden deliberately to protect a legacy? What treasures remain sealed beneath dunes, waiting for rediscovery? And what truths about power, conquest, and silence might those missing tombs finally reveal? Amid the ruins of Meroa, broken stelae lie half buried in sand, carved with symbols that no modern scholar can fully read. Their lines resemble hieroglyphs, yet diverge into shapes and marks that resist translation, forming the mysterious script of the Kushite kingdom's final centuries. The paradox is striking. How can a civilization that flourished for hundreds of years leave behind a written language that remains undeciphered, even in an age of satellites and supercomputers? Egypt's hieroglyphs have been decoded, their meanings unlocked through the Rosetta Stone. But for the Meroitic script, no bilingual key has ever been found, leaving the last voice of Kush silent, its words frozen in stone like a language exiled from history. Some believe Egypt's cultural dominance overshadowed Kush so completely that knowledge of the script was lost when Egypt's influence deepened. Others claim the silence was deliberate, an erasure carried out through conquest and assimilation, designed to sever Kush's independence. Fringe theorists whisper that the script holds records too disruptive for later powers to allow, maps of hidden lands, chronicles of forgotten queens, or accounts that contradict Egypt's supremacy. Scholars still debate whether the script was phonetic, syllabic, or something else entirely, a system unique in form and logic. Historians dispute whether fragments found in temples and tombs represent a living language or ritual symbols never meant for public literacy. And yet the enigma endures. Why has a civilization capable of constructing pyramids, ruling empires, and defeating Rome left behind a script more impenetrable than the cuneiform of Mesopotamia? Still, the questions linger. Was the silence of Meroitic writing the result of chance, conquest, or concealment? What truths about Kushite power remain trapped inside those undeciphered symbols? And if the script is ever broken, will it rewrite the story of Africa's forgotten empire? Along Egypt's temple walls, carved scenes depict triumphant pharaohs striking down dark-skinned foes, their enemies labeled as Kushites, crushed beneath imperial might. But nowhere in those inscriptions does the Kushite side of the story survive. The paradox is undeniable. A kingdom powerful enough to rule Egypt during the 25th dynasty, to build hundreds of pyramids, to command gold mines and queens who defied Rome, has left behind little of its own version of history. Why is the record of victories so one-sided, the story told almost entirely through the lens of their rivals? Some suggest that Egypt's scribes deliberately crafted propaganda, exaggerating victories and erasing defeats, ensuring that posterity would see Kush as forever subordinate. Others argue that Kush's own chronicles existed but were written in Meroitic script, now lost to us through centuries of silence. Fringe researchers insist the destruction was intentional, that Egyptian rulers not only conquered Kush militarily, but waged a war of memory, chiseling out names, burning records, and recasting their southern neighbors as perpetual rebels rather than equals. Scholars remain divided. Was Kush incapable of preserving its past, or was it stolen from them? Historians dispute whether surviving Egyptian reliefs are reliable evidence or distorted monuments of ego. And yet the mystery persists. If Kush truly defied Egypt so many times, where are their annals, their monuments, their voices? Still, the questions linger. Was history written only by Egypt, burying Kush beneath lies of conquest? How many victories of Kush lie hidden beneath erasures? And what would it mean if the real story revealed that Egypt's greatest rival was never truly defeated? In the heat of the Nubian plains, broken statues of Roman soldiers lie scattered among ruined walls, relics of a war Rome did not entirely win. Ancient chroniclers record a startling tale that queens of Kush, known as Candaces, led armies against Augustus himself, raiding Roman outposts and forcing a treaty on terms favorable to Kush. The paradox glares from history. How could the most powerful empire of the ancient world suffer defeat at the hands of African queens, yet leave behind so little record of it? Roman sources acknowledge the battles, yet later accounts reduce them to footnotes, overshadowed by the grandeur of Augustus's victories elsewhere. Some maintain Rome deliberately downplayed the humiliation, rewriting the story as a minor skirmish instead of a political concession. Others suggest Kush's own records, likely inscribed in the Meroitic script, have been lost to time, leaving only the Roman perspective. Fringe theorists propose the encounter was far more significant, that Kush not only held its ground, but extracted immense tribute, forcing Rome to respect an African power it could not easily subdue. Scholars remain divided. Was it a rare moment of defiance or evidence of a long-standing balance of power? Historians dispute whether Rome feared Kush enough to avoid further campaigns or simply shifted focus to other conquests. And yet, the enigma remains. Why does history remember Rome's every triumph, yet consign the queens of Kush to obscurity? Still, the questions linger. Why were their victories reduced to whispers? What did Rome fear in remembering them too clearly? And how many more empires were humbled by rivals whose names we no longer know? Rising above the desert like a colossal sentinel, Jebel Barkal towers in silence near the banks of the Nile. Its sheer cliffs cast long shadows at dusk, and at their base lie ruins of temples where Kushite kings once proclaimed their right to rule. They called this mountain the dwelling of power itself, the axis where earth and sky converged. The paradox deepens when Egypt later claimed the same site, declaring it theirs, absorbing its sanctity into their own traditions. Whose claim was first, and why would rival kingdoms anchor their legitimacy to the same solitary mountain? Some believe Jebel Barkal was revered by both cultures as a natural landmark, a symbol of divine kingship too powerful to ignore. Others argue Egypt deliberately appropriated the site to legitimize their conquest, overwriting Kush's traditions with their own. Fringe researchers whisper that the mountain was more than symbolic, that its caves, temples, and alignments encoded astronomical knowledge, making it both shrine and observatory. Scholars still debate whether the earliest shrines belonged to Kush or to Egyptian settlers pushing south. Historians dispute whether the mountain's sanctity was born from local belief or imposed by imperial propaganda. And yet the mystery endures. Why did both nations fight not just for land, but for the right to claim this mountain as the center of their world? Still, the questions linger. Was Jebel Barkal the original source of Egypt's legitimacy, stolen from Kush? What secrets remain buried in its caves and ruins? And could this solitary peak still hold the key to rewriting the history of power along the Nile? Across the desert plains of Sudan, dunes rise like golden oceans, shifting endlessly under the wind. Beneath their surface, archaeologists suspect stone walls, columns, and entire avenues of temples lie concealed, buried cities of Kush swallowed whole by sand. The paradox is glaring. How can a civilization that built more pyramids than Egypt, that ruled empires and defied Rome, still hide uncharted centers beneath the desert, invisible to modern maps until satellites pierce the dunes? High-resolution scans have revealed rectangular shadows, geometric outlines, and subterranean anomalies that do not occur naturally. Some suggest they are fortresses or palaces never seen in recorded history. Others claim they may be temples deliberately buried, hidden from foreign invaders or rival kingdoms. Fringe researchers whisper of entire lost cities, their destruction and burial part of a deliberate attempt to erase Kush from memory. The debate intensifies. Some argue the sands buried the sites naturally as climates shifted, swallowing towns when the desert advanced. Others maintain that destruction and concealment were deliberate acts by Egypt, suppressing the evidence of Kushite splendor to ensure their rival would fade into obscurity. Scholars still debate whether these sites will ever be excavated without destroying them, or whether the cost of uncovering them is too high. Historians dispute why satellite data showing massive buried complexes has not been followed up with large-scale digs. And yet, the enigma endures. What kind of empire lies preserved in silence beneath dunes that stretch for miles? Still, the questions linger. Are these hidden ruins the true heart of Kush, concealed until the world is ready to remember? What treasures and inscriptions might wait below, untouched for millennia? And if we uncover them, will they force us to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the power of the Nile? On ancient stone lists of Egyptian rulers, names march in neat succession, each pharaoh carved as though history flowed seamlessly from one to the next. Yet, glaringly absent are the Kushite kings of the 25th dynasty, the so-called Black Pharaohs, who once ruled both Kush and Egypt with authority. The paradox cannot be ignored. How can rulers who built temples, led armies, and left monuments across two kingdoms be absent from the official record, as if they never existed? Inscriptions scratched out, cartouches chiseled away, statues decapitated. This was more than conquest. It was a campaign of memory. Some believe it was simple politics, Egyptian successors erasing rivals to legitimize their own rule. Others argue it was something deeper, a cultural purge designed to deny that Kush had ever been an equal, let alone a master of Egypt. Fringe theorists propose this was not just erasure, but theft, the appropriation of Kushite achievements absorbed into Egyptian legacy, leaving Kush stripped of its rightful place. Scholars remain divided. Were the missing names accidental gaps in the record or the scars of deliberate censorship? Historians dispute whether Egypt's chroniclers truly controlled the narrative, or whether fragments of Kushite testimony still wait, buried beneath the sand. And yet the mystery remains. How many victories, monuments, and achievements of Kush were absorbed into Egypt's glory, their origin disguised? Still, the questions linger. Was this not conquest, but a systematic rewriting of history itself? How much of Egypt's grandeur was inherited rather than earned? And how many civilizations have been silenced by the chisels of those who claim to speak for eternity? In legends of Kush, the golden regalia of kings, the crown, the scepter, the emblems of rule, vanished from record. Archaeologists search tombs, pyramids, and sand-swallowed ruins, yet the symbols of authority remain missing. The paradox is haunting. How could the crown of an empire that once ruled the Nile simply disappear, leaving only whispers of its existence? Some suggest Egypt seized it, carrying it north to display as a trophy of conquest. Others claim priests buried it before invaders arrived, hiding it so deeply it would never be found. Fringe researchers insist it was not lost at all, but absorbed into Egypt's own regalia, rebranded as their own symbols of sovereignty. The debate runs cold and hot. Some argue the crown may lie in looted tombs, stolen by ancient robbers and melted into gold long ago. Others maintain its concealment was intentional, a final act of defiance by Kushite rulers who refused to let their symbols fall into enemy hands. Scholars still debate whether Egypt's silence about Kushite regalia is coincidence or calculated omission. Historians dispute whether the absence of evidence reflects true loss or deliberate erasure. And yet the enigma endures. How can a crown, once placed upon the heads of rulers who defied empires, vanish so completely from memory and museum alike? Still, the questions linger. Is the crown still buried beneath the sands of Nubia, waiting to be unearthed? Was it stolen, melted, and forgotten, its legacy erased? Or does it sit hidden in plain sight, misattributed as the treasure of another empire? From vanished crowns to silenced queens, from burned temples to undeciphered scripts, the kingdom of Kush hovers at the edges of history like a ghost empire, present in fragments, absent in narrative. The paradox endures. How can a kingdom that rivaled Egypt, that ruled Rome to a standstill, that built hundreds of pyramids, be reduced to shadows in textbooks? Some suggest it was simply the fate of conquered nations. Others argue it was deliberate. Cover-up engineered by Egypt and inherited by those who repeated their version of history. Fringe researchers whisper that Kush is only one of many civilizations erased, its silence echoing a larger pattern of forgotten empires deliberately written out. Scholars remain divided. Was Kush truly a victim of conquest or of historical theft? Historians dispute how much of Egypt's legacy might belong not to the pharaohs, but to their southern rivals. And yet the enigma remains, lingering like sand over buried temples. Still the questions linger. How many more crowns lie beneath dunes, unrecorded and unseen? How many stories were erased not by time, but by those who feared what they revealed? And what else waits, just beyond the silence of sand, ready to upend everything we believe about history?